During that period of time before we started the book, I was doing some consulting with a manufacturer, and I spent quite a bit of time on the shop floor and up in the office area with the frontline employees, learning their jobs, and we were giving some advice on how to, in those days, become more efficient. I was moved by the importance of each of those workers, both on the line as well as up in the office. If they didn't do what they were there to do and do it well, the overall system would be less viable. So one person meant a whole system, significant performance changes. You'd want the top tier to be closer to the work. In fact, the Japanese companies, which we featured in the book, Toyota Manufacturing System, had a firm requirement that all managers at every level go to the Gemba. And the Gemba was wherever the actual work is being done by the machines and people, or by the people alone, where they're closest in contact, not only with the product, but with the customer. Go to the Gemba. And I can remember American managers being very uncomfortable with that. They'll say, oh, well, they'll think we're just spying on them or we're interfering. And yet I studied one company which followed that principle. And at 7 a.m., the CEO and all the top staff and all the way through to the supervisor would walk down through the whole operation, whole company, and ask for anything that they could do. And it was sincere. And by the end of that walking the Gemba, they had copious notes of things that the employees themselves told them that needed attention every day. We incorporated quite a bit of the Toyota production system back when we were working in those plants, but also writing the book. Another principle, which I think we cited in the book, was that every employee was empowered to stop the line if they're producing automobiles or shipping product. They had the power to stop the line in order to point out something that could be dangerous or expensive or both. Then they would swarm that point of concern, even the people who financed the company, and they would make decisions on the spot. So that was pretty profound to see that happening, because in many manufacturing companies, when you stop the line, there's money that's not moving until that product is flowing again. And so there was a creative tension to really figure things out quickly. And so that translated into saying, well, if we write a book about manufacturing type of company where we can put the employees in very similar jobs, then focused on one person and see if, with some changes in her knowledge of her, not just her job, but of how to be attentive to what was going on and voice some changes and act on some changes, then we'll get a pretty good picture of how to manage that company overall. I know that's a stretch, but one is all. What we hoped for our character, Dana Gilbert, was that at least her supervisor would be open to easygoing conversation about the work. And it was true for the first 2.5 years of her time at the company. And then in came a different kind of supervisor who didn't want to be close to those call center people, felt that that would undermine her power and authority. And so while she would get close to them physically, she held herself back and kept closed off in terms of any kind of easygoing conversation about the work. It was I'll look into it. I'll take care of it. Write that up and give it to me instead of, yeah, let's lean in and take a look and see what's going on, which her previous supervisor did very easily and made Dana's life a lot easier as well. And he solved a lot more problems. We made it a novel because my co-author, Steve Cavallari, and I knew that if it was like a textbook, they would read that and they probably would not remember it a week later unless they were acting on it. So in the book, whenever we show a principle by our main consultant, Bailey, if we have a principle that she's imparting to our frontline worker, Dana, after getting that principle clear in her mind about particularly how to enhance the quality of her knowledge, noticing better and processing things and widening the scope of her attention, she would start to see things that she never thought of looking for before. And that awareness, that was growing awareness, is what the system itself was achieving in companies where that was used. So we said, okay, let's just show these ideas and get them into the story and show people what comes out rather than just preaching any particular discipline. Now, it's still the same. If it's not ultimately in the mind and the heart of the employees who need to implement those theories, which is all they are, then they just sit on the shelf. So we've got to work them into the daily experience of your workers. And this was a major message of the book. Again, we showed that rather than telling people this is what you need to do. So we hope when managers read the book, they would see, I can see myself changing by reading this book. But we also wanted the frontline people to read it, so we made it an interesting story. If they were handed a book by their supervisor saying, you should read this, you might find something about us in here, the company. If you do, let's talk about it. So we thought the book could have more conversational power. We wanted a better work life for everyone in any particular organization, a hospital, a school, a manufacturing company. Well, if we started out and framed it as a self-help book, it would be very different. But again, knowing in our hearts that we wanted to show that our main character, Dana, was struggling at the beginning of the story. She was unhappy. She was feeling passed over and ignored, basically. Plus, there was an so-called innovation coming in that was going to take away a lot, if not all, of the work of those call center human beings. There was a lot of fear and disappointment. So from a standpoint of, who feels like this? Well, we think a lot of people feel like that more or less much of the time. So we showed Dana getting solid advice from Lewis Fuller, who was a consultant in the company, and also an expert in American pragmatism, which is learn in action, learning by what's going on, learning experientially. And so we had an expert in pragmatism, as well as my co-author being an expert in pragmatism. And so as we were developing the knowledge, the inside knowledge that the book refers to, we emphasize that this is knowledge you acquire in action. There's also knowledge that you can bring off the shelf in a book or in a course or external kind of sources. And that this other knowledge is pragmatic, meaning it's practically achieved tested inaction and corrected inaction. You blend the two, and you've got a pretty proficient employee. And Bailey, who talked about learning in action, could show Dana how to help herself by changing her beliefs, seeing things differently. So yeah, there's self-help in there too. Asking people to mind their own business when in fact it was everybody's business in that company. So there is, by the way, a reward at the end of our book for those who use their voices. It would be our hope that the book can help a person achieve some of those improvements in their own lives and situations at work. But we can't claim that we had a formula for that happening. But what we do have is a happy ending. They went through a real tough period. Our main protagonists were basically out of work. They got too close to some fraud and waste that was going on. And upper level managers didn't want that to be revealed. So there's a bit of what's going on today in regard to that behavior. Cover up and believed in what their eye was telling them and spoke up. And that's baked right into the story. It came out in 2006. We felt it's something right about it, looking at it 20 years later. So when I wrote the new chapters for the second edition, they start out 20 years later for Dana Gilbert. A lot has changed in her life, her business life, her personal life. At that point, when Dana, who was 20 years older than when the book started, was basically finally resigning. She said to herself, with so many of these unfriendly takeovers that have happened and changes of upper management almost every other year, she couldn't feel confident that she could trust or have the trust of the people she needed to in order to do her job. And that is going on. Acquisitions, mergers are churning up many mid-sized companies, and they come in and they create a lot of debt, and then they have to make reductions in forces and all the rest. And that was, it started out with a not happy moment, but it started out with what I thought was going on today that would be significant to anyone working in any kind of organization, including hospitals and schools and universities.